For the next few moments, I want to use for our subject, results of moving in the right direction. Results of moving in the right direction. If I were to take a survey among those watching the worship service today and ask what you wanted for your faith, what you want your faith to do for you or in the lives of the people around you or the communities where you live, many of you would say that you want your faith to move you in the right direction. You don't want to have faith in vain. You want guidance in your prayers. You want wisdom to come from your thoughts. None of us wants to have faith for nothing. We want to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that we are moving in the right direction. Anyone who spends even a small amount of time on social media or watching television knows that one of the more popular themes that gets our attention is the age-old before and after. That was me then, and this is me now. Two pictures side by side that tell a story, that show what happened when we use a certain shampoo or a carpet cleaner or a laundry detergent, whatever it is. The message is, if you want these results, use this and not that. On social media, people like to post before and after pictures side by side so you can see the difference that 30 days has made, or 6 months, or even a year. After 25 push-ups a day, this is what I look like now. And so check out the results. After running a few miles a day, look at what I looked like before, but look at the results now. Even if somebody has not reached their goal, they want you to see the pictures and know that they are pressing their way and moving in the right direction. And it's a common misconception that God is not interested in results. It's true that we are human, we're fallible, we're prone to mistakes. God knows this, but do not think that God is indifferent to results. That's not a biblically accurate view. The Apostle Paul once wrote that in the race of life, he did not run aimlessly. He was not like a boxer fighting the air. He said he was like an athlete training his body to do what it should do so that after he has enlisted others to run the race, he won't be declared unfit and told to stand aside. He wanted his life to produce the results. James, the book we're studying on Wednesday night, says that faith without works, that is, efforts that don't lead to results, is dead. Jesus said in John 15:2 that the Father cuts off every branch that does not bear fruit, that produces no results, and prunes every branch that does bear fruit so it can be more fruitful, that is, it can produce more results. So yes, God is interested in result. God cares if our worship leads to more intimacy with God. God cares if reading the scripture leads to more self-examination. God cares if our faith makes us better equipped to live lives with purpose and joy. Seeing the right results lets us know that we're going in the right direction. As we look at this letter from the Apostle Paul, and even that he wrote along with his companions Silas and Timothy to the Thessalonians, they send greetings to their brothers and sisters in the faith. They go on to say in chapter 2 verse 1 that their visit to the believers in Thessalonica was not without results. And once you consider what happened to them during their trip to Thessalonica, it's not hard to imagine that they and maybe even other people might have wondered if things were moving in the wrong direction. And that can be frustrating. Church, who wants to take on something new only to find out after you spend time and money that you've been going in the wrong direction? To some, it might have looked like at the time that Paul and his companions spent in Thessalonica was wasted time. Paul said that's not true. He said, just look at the results of my visit. Go back to Acts chapter 17, where it tells us about the brief visit that Paul and his companions made to Thessalonica. It says that he went to the synagogue every Sabbath day for 3 weeks, teaching to prove from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah who had to suffer, die, and rise from the dead. A few of the Jews were convinced, and a large number of Greeks came on board as disciples, but in the end, Paul's ministry led to a riot in the city. People might have questioned whether the riots in Thessalonica overshadowed the results of Paul's ministry in the city. They might have claimed that the negative consequences consequences of the looting and the violence overruled the positive effects of Paul's teaching in the synagogues. Was he moving in the wrong direction, or was he really going in the right direction? It's hard to tell unless you know what you're looking for. You see, one of the challenges that we face today is that we know a good bit about what is happening in the world, but we don't know as much about what the results are going to be. What is going to happen as a result of HBCUs that are going to offer only online classes for the fall semester? What is going to be the result of sending elementary school students back to school districts that don't have the resources to effectively distance the children in the school building? There are states that opened up last month and they were told that they were opening too soon. Now they're thinking about closing down again because the results are in, and we can see that the warning of a spike in coronavirus cases were right on the money. Who knew that the results of the protest of the death of George Floyd would lead to the toppling of Confederate monuments in the Deep South, Mississippi retiring and redesigning its state flag, and universities renaming buildings on their campuses? I don't think that we've arrived yet, church, but sometimes results have a way of surprising us. On a personal level, all of us have seen things and said things and done things that have produced surprising and shocking outcomes. When we think about where we are right now, the question arises, what will be the result of the season that we're in right now? Notice I did not ask you what season you are in, because everybody's in a different season. Somebody's in a season of celebration, others are in a season of distress, some are in a season of patient perseverance, others are in a season of praise and thanksgiving. Everybody's in a different season, even though collectively we're all in the same season of a pandemic. Still, the question before us, before all of us, is what will be the result of the season we are in? Regardless of what the next season turns out to be, how is this season going to make more out of our life? How is this season going to make more room for God in our life? Will it cause us to be more empathetic to the needs of others? Will it help us to trust God at a deeper level? Will it help us to handle adversity in the future differently than we handled it in the past? Will generosity start to flow from a heart that is gripped by gratitude? What will the results be that keep us moving in the right direction? In other words, when you take to social media for yourself and you begin to post your before and after experiences, what are you going to be talking about? How your trials became your training ground? When you talk to your children or your grandchildren about living through this moment, what testimonies are you going to share with them? When you look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself about yourself, what are you going to say to yourself? Are you going to talk about what you could have done? Or will you be able to talk about the evidence that God is at work in your life? Paul was clear with the Thessalonians that his visit to them had not been a waste of time. Nobody wanted it to end in a riot, but in the end, we know that the apostle and his companions were moving in the right direction because there were some good results that came out of their visit. The first result, as we can see in the text, is that they were able to show how you live with courage in the face of a crisis. You see, faith is not for sunny days. Faith is for the stormy days. Faith is not for the times when we know everything. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things we have not seen. Faith is not for smooth sailing. Faith is for when the waves are crashing over the side of our tiny little boats. Therefore, we know we're moving in the right direction when we're able to live with courage in the face of a crisis. Verse 1 says that the visit Paul and his companions made to Thessalonica was not without results. In verse 2, it says that they suffered and were treated horribly in Philippi before they came to Thessalonica. Despite the abuse they suffered, they continued to press forward and they made it to Thessalonica. And verse 2 goes on to say that with the help of God, they dared to declare the gospel in in the face of strong opposition. Here's what I'm trying to get you to see, church. When the moment arrived that should have made them say, forget it, I'm going back home, they dared to keep on preaching. That makes me wonder about us. Is our testimony going to be how we made it over, or is our testimony going to be how we almost made it over? Sometimes the least bit of opposition makes us think that we are going in the wrong direction, and we stop where we are. The exercise routine makes our legs hurt, so we stop. Going back to school makes our minds hurt, so we stop. We propose a new idea and our feelings get hurt, and we stop. What if you're really going in the right direction? What are you going to do in the face of strong opposition? Think about what happened to Paul and his companions before they got to Thessalonica. It says that they previously suffered and were mistreated in Philippi. If they would have stopped because of the suffering and the pain that they had in Philippi, they never would have made it to Thessalonica. Anytime we suffer or mistreated, it can make us shrink back, and the next time we suffer a similar situation, we start to have the same kind of reaction. If we didn't like what happened back then, if we didn't like the experience we had back then, if it hurt too much, if it was too uncomfortable, then the next time we get into that same situation, it brings up those same feelings, and we may avoid saying something, doing something, or interacting with someone just so we can minimize the conflict and the discomfort. In other words, we become less free, less bold, less of who we are, and we start to squeeze ourselves into other people's expectations. You put a pin right there. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, because we start working harder to make sure that we are acceptable to others rather than live authentically as ourselves. This may work in the short term, but it's not going to work out well in the long run. What are we going to do in the face of strong opposition? And we need to know, because we will have some opposition. Strong opposition is going to come. It may not always come from other people, though it probably will, but sometimes strong opposition is what I call homegrown. What I mean by that is it comes from within ourselves. You can put yourself in a prison of your own making and start to lose courage in the face of a crisis. Dr. Maya Angelou had a lot to say about courage. She said we should build our courage muscle daily by being courageous in the little things. Do something every day that makes you a little uncomfortable. Remind yourself that your fear may have more to do with the past than your present or the future. Paul and Silas had been jailed in Philippi. They had been jailed because they spoke out of their theological convictions about Christ, and they got out of jail and they didn't go back home. They kept going to Thessalonica because the Spirit told them they were going in the right direction. That's when we can see their courage, because instead of hanging up their preaching robe and being done with ministry, Paul went on to Thessalonica despite the strife that he had to deal with in Philippi. And every week for 3 weeks he taught in the Sabbath about who Christ is. He dared to continue courageously in the face of opposition. Silas had been with him in Philippi, and I don't know if one had to encourage the other or convince the other to keep going, but look at the results of their life. They broke out of a self-made prison. They chose to exercise the freedom that God gave them. They chose to walk in their calling instead of in fear. They chose to rely on the power of God and not fall apart in the face of opposition. And I hope that somebody hearing this today can take a long, hard look at your opposition and find courage in the face of it so you can keep on going. The last thing that Moses told Joshua before he died was, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid because of your opposition, for the Lord your God goes with you, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Courage ought to be the result of our praying. Courage ought to be the result of our studying. Courage ought to be the result of the songs we sing and the prayers that we pray and the worship that we have, so that we can know we're moving in the right direction. Something else happened when Paul and his companions got to Thessalonica to let them know they were going in the right direction. In verses 3 through 6, Paul uses his brilliant rhetorical abilities to make his intentions clear. He assures the believers that he's not trying to trick them. You see, people didn't always trust Paul, and I can understand why. Before Paul became a Christian, his name was Saul, and he violently persecuted the church. He stood by and watched as one of the first deacons of the church was stoned to death. People don't easily forget your past, even when you change. So Paul goes on to say that he and his companions are not trying to please people, but they're pleasing God, and he says, God tests our hearts. In verse 5, it says, we never had any hidden agendas. We never tried to take advantage of you. We were never condescending. We never tried to flatter you. And then listen to what he says in verse 6. We were not looking for praise from people. Here's how you know you're going in the right direction, church. The audience that you aim to please gets smaller and smaller. Let me be plain. Paul said, you don't have to worry about us trying to get over on you because you are not the one we want approval from. We want God's approval first. That's how you know you are moving in the right direction. The number of people that you want to impress gets smaller and smaller. Amen, lights. The amount of applause you need for motivation begins to decrease. Criticism doesn't feel as personal. It's God's opinion of you that matters more than anything else. I wish that you all were in the sanctuary this morning so you could talk back to me and I would know exactly where you are today, because it's natural to start out wanting to please our friends and the significant adults in our life. But eventually we've got to graduate from trying to please everybody to pleasing God and letting everything else work itself out. In James Baldwin's novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Baldwin tells the story of a young African-American boy named John who's growing up in Harlem in the early 20th century. John was a good boy, but not the athlete that his older brother was. John was bookish and liked to read, and more than anything else, John wanted the affection and approval of his mother, who was not an affectionate person. John's father, who was a preacher, was not warm and affectionate towards him either, and he was stern and demanding. And so one year on John's birthday, he woke up, greeted his mother, and she did not say happy birthday. That crushed John because it seemed that his own mother forgot his birthday, but John was too proud to even say a word to remind her. He went through the whole morning thinking that his own mother had forgotten his birthday. He was waiting on her just to come out and say something that would let him know that he had her affection and approval, but his mother didn't say a word to him about the birthday. She just kept giving him chores and work to do. But later in the day, after John finished some of his chores, his mother called him into the kitchen. She reached her hand into a large vase in the cupboard and pulled out a few coins, and she stuffed the coins into John's hand and said, "Son, go out and get yourself something for your birthday." There were no hugs that morning, no celebration, no cake, no balloons, but that was enough for John, because as she released those coins into John's hands, he realized that his mother had not forgotten. The coins were few, not much to be able to buy something with, but the gift left him and let him know that he had his mother's approval after all, and that meant more to John than anything. Baldwin went on to write that John wanted to burst into tears of joy and relief that his mother loved him, and that's natural for a young child to be focused on pleasing significant people like our mother. But there comes a point when the audience you're trying to please gets smaller and smaller. Now, don't take this as a license to be callous to people or insensitive to people, nor is this a reason not to take wise counsel from people. It's just that once you realize that everybody has expectations, you'll know that you cannot possibly live up to everybody's expectations, and you stop looking for praise from people who want to manipulate you but don't want to support you. You stop expecting encouragement from people that want to control you and don't want to contribute to your success. You stop waiting on genuine genuine partnership from people who only value what you can do for them, but they don't appreciate who you are. Once people can't make you dance to their music, they lose their power over you. Paul was not trying to insult anybody, but he was not trying to play games either. His audience had become so small that the only person he wanted to please was God. He said in verse 4, we're not trying to please people, but God who tests our hearts. Please means to accommodate oneself to the opinions, to the desires, or to the interests of other people. In verse 4, he says, we were not looking for praise from people, from you or anybody else. Do you know how exhausting it can be to base your feelings about yourself on how other people praise you? In verse 12, we urge you, he says, to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and his glory. So the key to moving in the right direction is you've got to remember who your real audience is. It's not the person whose name is on your paycheck. It's not the corporation whose name is on the building. It's not fair weather friends that you're trying to get to like the stuff that you put on social media. It's not the people that burden you with unrealistic expectations. You are moving in the right direction when the first person you're trying to please is God who created you, and God who formed you, and God who redeems you, and God who calls you and justifies you, and who in the end will stand alone to judge you. I don't know about you, but I pray often that I'm going in the right direction. Let me give you one more way that Paul and his companions knew they were moving in the right direction. Not only did they have courage in the face of opposition, and not only did their audience get smaller and smaller, but church, you are going in the right direction when you begin to focus less on being served and more on serving others. First, permit me to share a word of pastoral wisdom, and then I'll explain what happened with Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Being focused on serving others does not mean that we should never receive a service to ourselves. Even Jesus allowed a woman to pour expensive perfume on him and wash his feet with her hair. He let Martha cook a meal for him and a Samaritan woman get a drink of water for him. When it comes to hospitality, we have to learn to give and receive. A wise man once told me that while you are trying to show hospitality to others, don't forget to show hospitality to yourself. What comes up in the text, though, is that when Paul and his companions were living among the Thessalonians, they demonstrated their faith by servant leadership and sacrificial giving. That means that if the only result of our faith is that we want people to do more for us, we've got to question whether our faith is the real deal. Paul likened himself to a nursing mother, and we know that nursing mothers are on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They literally surrender their bodies for the well-being of their child. When the baby cries, the nursing mother is right there. When the baby is hungry, the nursing mother feeds him. When the baby wants to be held, the nursing mother begins to react. Paul says we were like a nursing mother caring for her children. He says in verse 9 that they loved the Thessalonians so much that they shared with them not only the gospel, but their very lives as well. And that's how we begin to know that God is maturing us, that you can open up and share some of your life with somebody else. You can trust somebody else and be trusted by them. I know you've been burned before, but this is how we know we're moving in the right direction. Because community is not built when we're just in the same building. Community is built when we share our lives with other people. Paul said we worked and we toiled. We preached and we served. We loved and we served. We taught and we served. We encouraged you and we served. We comforted you and we served. It's clear from this that we are moving in the right direction. We're going to focus less on being served and more on how we can serve somebody else. We cannot faithfully follow Jesus and remain selfish and self-centered. We cannot love the Lord our God with all our heart, our mind, our soul, and our strength, and not love our neighbor as we love ourselves. We can't love the God we cannot see and not love our brother and sister we see every day. When we're going in the right direction, sooner or later the Holy Spirit will grip our hearts and cause us to confess, like John the Baptist said, I must decrease so that he can increase. Sooner or later, when the need arises, we'll have to say like Isaiah said to the Lord, here I am, God, send me. Eventually, when we are growing in God and our faith is moving in the right direction, we'll say like that little boy said to a crowd, Jesus, if you need my 5 barley loaves and 2 fish to feed the multitude, you can have mine. And we do not serve because we have to, but we serve because there's really no other way. We follow a man that said, I came not to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. We follow a man that said, my food is to do the will of the Father that sent me. We follow a man that said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to set the captives free, to give sight to the blind and liberty to those that are oppressed. Now is the time to keep moving in the right direction. No more standing in place. Now is the time to see some results. God has prepared you for where you are right now. So now is the time to put your results on display. You may not realize it, but every hill you had to climb was building your spiritual muscles. Every battle you had to fight was teaching you how to be courageous. So you ought to show the enemy the results of your faith. I'm so glad that with God on our side, we can see the results of goodness and mercy. Because my Bible says that the result of prayer is that if I ask, I shall receive. If I seek, I will find. And if I knock, the door will be open. I'm so glad that the result of God's grace is that power is made perfect in weakness. I'm so glad that when I've got the Lord as my shepherd, I've got goodness and mercy following me all the days of my life. But you know why I'm really glad? Because my God does everything to get results. Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. He didn't want to be betrayed by Judas and Peter. He didn't want to be tried in a rigged court. But God said, I'm trying to get some results. I'm trying to take the sting out of death. I'm trying to take the victory out of the grave. And when he got up with all power, it's so that I could stand here this morning and tell somebody, no weapon formed against you shall be able to prosper. So walk by faith and not by sight. Trust in God and he will make a way somehow. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. God is a God who gets results. God sent his son through 40 and 2 generations. And even when it looked like he wasn't going in the right direction, enemies all around him, his body hanging lifeless on a cross, God said, yeah, just keep having courage in the face of opposition. And I'll show you on the 3rd day what I can do if you don't turn around, if you don't quit, if you don't give up. So that's my prayer for you as we continue day by day, week by week, dealing with the unknown, dealing with the unexpected. Let God give you courage in the face of a crisis. Remember that you only have an audience of one that truly matters. And I promise you, you will see great results in your life as you let God make you a servant of other people. The doors of the church are open, and we invite you today. If you've never been baptized, if you desire to make Union Baptist Church your home, invite you to call us at 855-PRAY-UBC. One of our ministers is standing by, and we would love to hear from you today. Give us a call.